Welcome back to another episode of the Unleash Your Radiance podcast. I am very excited today because I'm joined by a very special guest. I am joined by Camilla, and Camilla is a vehicle of change. She has spent the past 8 years professionally specializing in mentoring, coaching, and advisory of top level executives in the public, private, and charitable organizations worldwide. She has also devoted over 13 years of her life consciously studying, exploring, and expanding human consciousness at individual, collective, and systemic levels. From shamans to boardrooms, Camilla is continuously turning herself to become an instrument she needs for the people she meets and elevates. Every commitment is carefully evaluated from this viewpoint, and when leaders are open to change, she is their vehicle. Camilla, welcome to the Unleash Your Radiance podcast. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Thanks, Lori. It's good to be here.
Amazing. Camilla, I always start with the question. I always ask every guest this question as you are on the Unleash Your Radiance podcast, and I'm all about radiant living. But what does that really mean to you when you hear that question? What does radiant living mean to you?
Radiant living. I mean, radiant is such a really nice feeling word. It immediately drops me into my heart.
Hmm.
I guess to me, I would say radiant living is really living in your truth, living from your heart rather than in your head, and living in alignment. So, not really having a gap between your wishes and dreams that you might have for how you want to spend your life, but actually being the embodiment of that reality that you want to create for yourself and everybody around you.
I love that so much. And that, like the word embodiment, that's been coming up a lot lately.
Mm.
I've noticed in conversations I've been having and some of the work I've been doing as well. And, I think embodiment, that gap is so important because so many of us, I think, spend this time like, I wish things were different. I would love to be doing this. I'd love to be doing that, but not actually thinking, well, that's actually available and possible for you. And not actually taking that leap to bridge that gap of like, who is it you need to become to start bringing more of that into your life to create that radiant living. So yeah, that's amazing that you pinpointed that.
Absolutely. And our words are so powerful. People
Mm-hmm.
don't realize that, we're all really fundamentally creators. And, conventionally people think of artists who paint as, or people who are in media or creative arts as creators, but we all are. And I've realized really recently the power that language has in terms of how we speak things as being part of what really bridges that veil, because we can speak realities and paths and possibilities you were talking about into existence just by being a little bit more mindful about what words we choose and how we decide to express ourselves. So, yeah, fully agree with that.
Oh, 100%. Like the power of words, especially in manifestation, is like massive, right? Words are so powerful. And like, if you've seen those studies before, I forget that guy's name. It's that Japanese scientist, where he does the test where he's showing like the water, and by speaking to water, like it changes molecules in it. And there's also the study with the rice in the jars, and like they'll put, like for 1 week, the jar, it was like said loving words to it. I think the rice was in water and it started to sprout. And then the other jar like was completely neglected and it started to go moldy and brown. And the other one was like saying, things like, I hate you or you're terrible, you suck, and swearing at it. And again, the same thing, like it started to rot. So it's incredible. I'll have to share those links with you and I'll put them in the show notes as well. But it's incredible like how powerful words really are. And like you even see those studies as well where like people they've put plants in a room and like one of the plants had like death metal playing and then the other one would have classical and the one with the death metal like the plant started dying, which is wild. So it's like sound and words have so much power. Yeah.
So interesting. I've not heard of any of those studies. But yeah, like what came to me when you were sharing that is actually the power of connection and human presence. And there's
Yeah.
been studies that people have done with, people who are in jail and solitary confinement, and they have to create an alternative reality in their heads and an alternative community in their heads in order to survive. Otherwise, they die because we just can't be or thrive in any way. And I love your garden analogy, without being witnessed and being seen and being held by other people and really
Mm.
feeling that connection to something else that's alive too. Yeah. Fascinating.
Yeah, that is fascinating. You'll have to share that study with me as well. Put them all in the show notes. Love when you mix like the science and the spirituality as well. It's so incredible. Amazing. Well, Camilla, I know you have like such an incredible background. And I'd just like love to touch on that a little bit. Like I know you come from a corporate background, spending a lot of time in Deloitte, working with some of the top leaders in the world, coaching them and really being, a vehicle of change in this space. So I'd love to dive a little bit into your journey. How did you go from that like very corporate environment to now being this incredible entrepreneur with amazing, success and business growth? And I know you're in Peru at the moment, traveling the world. So yeah, let's go back and like guide us through that journey about how that's come to be.
Yeah, it's so interesting because on some levels, the transition feels so huge at an external level. Like, as you said, I don't even know where I live. I've been traveling the world. It's very different for sure, of activities and the communities and the networks I'm a part of. And they have definitely shifted compared to when I was using Deloitte as a vehicle. But at the same time, it feels like a continuation.
Mhm.
It feels like I'm just doing the same thing better in more alignment. So I really see Deloitte as the stepping stone and the beginning. And I think the reason why it was difficult to transition was because in many ways I had created the most comfortable setup for myself where I felt I was doing what I loved and I was really serving really interesting people with enough sovereignty and independence that a lot of people didn't really understand what I did except for my clients. And I had enough cover and sponsorship from senior owners within the firm that meant that I could work at the levels that I did. And I was also pretty free from a time perspective. And then there's a lot more, I guess, predictability and certainty on a personal front when I was an employee, than when I'm like, now a business owner and responsible for other people's salaries and responsible for, my like the own business's trajectory. So there's definitely key differences, but from a service perspective, I don't feel like there's been a transition at all. I feel it's just been peeling layers of the onion and continuously refining by making all of the work that I do better and better and better and becoming more aware of my shortcomings too along the way. And I think there are a lot of those.
I think we're always kind of going through those personal growth journeys as well, right? Like there's always going to be something, like every time we up level, it's going to be like a new thing that comes up to dive deeper
Mm.
into our own journey as well. So that's incredible. And like, yeah, let's talk a little bit about like, so how long have you been in your business for, like providing coaching at this level for?
Yeah. New level, new devil, right?
Yeah,
So
definitely.
I've been on this journey for over 8 years now. I would say 8.5 years since I started, coaching leaders. It started with Deloitte, and my private business, we set that up about 3 years ago, I want to say. But because I was still at Deloitte, it was more of a side hobby, taking that out until I delved full in. I think my journey like split when I really started specializing in the high performance teams, and really supporting leadership teams and executive teams getting to the next level, really raising the consciousness of organizations collectively. I was into culture work, leadership work, really supporting, those global leaders and solving really big, thorny, systemic challenges, whether they were like
Mm.
budget deficits or, employee morale and well-being, or really bringing in a new strategy and implementing it in a way that met some insanely difficult and rigid factors like timeline, resources, and all of that, all whilst catering to the human, and really unlocking potential in the meantime. And a few years into that, I realized that was just one part of
Yeah.
I and I realized through looking at myself in the mirror more clearly and various events that there was a whole world inside too. And I started getting really interested in personal development and in just consciousness in general, really understanding how we operate, how we feel, what happens in our psyche, got interested in our shadows, the whole
Mm,
spiritual came into play. And I brought more intentionally the individual transformation piece, which came a little bit later. And
yeah.
now I feel like I've come full circle. And I won't go into corporate now and work with a team unless I get a little bit of time with the CEO or the sponsor or the leader,
Okay.
working on them individually, because I really feel that it acts as a ceiling for any kind of collective consciousness that you need to raise. So helping people do the inner work has become pretty central to any kind of external outcome that I support people through.
Yeah, I love that transition about how you saw that realization from the corporate, like bringing in that personal development, spiritual aspect, because I think that is so important, and that is such a space that I think it's changing a little bit, but it's still such a key piece that's missing so much in corporate because, it's like people go, and like I've worked in corporate for many years of my life as well before, and it just felt like you had to be this different person. It was like put on this different mindset when you went to work and couldn't really show your full self properly, or like, there was just all this red tape in the way. And, it's just such a different environment versus like, I know the conversations I'm having now and the people I'm meeting with in entrepreneurship space, it's just such a different mentality in a lot of ways. And, I feel like there's that space to be all of you. Like you can take off the masks of like, that corporate standards that are there. And it's really nice to have that sense of feeling. And I think we do need to bring more of that personal development and spiritual aspect into the workplace as well, because I think, it's such a vehicle for so much change and growth that is really not there a lot in the corporate world as well.
Yeah, I fully agree. And I also feel like a lot of people have a lot of resistance. And I
Hmm.
actually personally don't mind at all how we label it. I think a lot of people, I would never use the term spiritual in any of those kind of environments because I think it's
Yeah.
like, talking about sex or politics in corporate, you're just going to end up putting people off. So there's really, really something around, for me, the true definition of a master is someone who walks with one foot in each world and being
Mm.
able to meet people where they are, because it's not so much raising them in any particular way. It's helping them really remove the conditioning and the
Yeah.
noise they've accumulated through years and years and years of being stuck in habitual patterns and not necessarily having the perspective to see, oh my gosh, if I shifted this a little bit, it would make a radical difference. Or there's this whole part of myself that I'm completely blind to. And it really triggers me when all these behaviors that I'm faced with on a weekly basis appear, but I'm really terrified and I haven't evolved past being a 5-year-old boy on the inside. And I don't want to delve in because I don't feel safe and I don't have the tools. And so, really equipping people to journey a little bit further than they would have had you
Yeah.
not intervened to take them further really tends to have ripples. And people don't need to believe in anything really other than themselves to be able to be pioneers in this space.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with how you said like having that ripple effect, right? Because if a leader is going to be doing the work on themselves, that's only going to lead to like greater leadership and involvement, and which is going to trickle down to their team and like other parts of the corporation and the workplace as well. So I think that's such an incredible aspect to bring in. And you said something there where you're like, I haven't evolved past a 5-year-old boy, which brings me to my next question is, I think sometimes there's like this stigma around leaders and high level CEOs and top leaders in the world, and you've worked with some of them, so I'd love to know, like, have you noticed any difference or similarities, for instance, of like what they might struggle with or mindset blocks or you know um paradigms in that sense versus maybe like new aspiring entrepreneurs or early stage entrepreneurs as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's really difficult to be a leader in this world. And obviously, there might be a slight bias because I don't work with people who don't have the openness
Mm,
of wanting to look in the mirror and who aren't
yeah.
interested in truth. So that's kind of the sample size. And, I say it often, I'll refer people away all the time when they want
Yeah.
to delegate a really root causal issue, like diversity and inclusion, or just wanting to fix something, but not wanting to have any part in it. I'm not your person. Because it's going to just be putting a band-aid on something when the underlying foundation isn't really set up. So
Hmm.
of those who are open, and there are lots, there's so many more than we realize, and some are just really, really craving for that invitation and that solution because they don't have those spaces. And so many people are not honest with them because
Yeah.
everyone wants of them. They are really influential people. They have a lot of resources. They have very little time. So there's
Yeah.
lots of scarcity there, and everyone wants their time, everyone wants the promotion, everyone wants their advice, and they don't really know who's being truly transparent and connecting with them on a human level versus who just needs something or wants something. And so there's really this need for boundaries and being guarded, and this issue with trust across the board,
Hmm.
because it takes time and it's tough to channel that out. And it's like, the equivalent is like a pretty girl. If you have a pretty girl and she's just so tired of being hit on because everybody thinks she's pretty, and it's like, well, do you actually care about her? Do you care about her appearance? I feel like leaders have a similar kind of issue, because people
Interesting. Yeah.
just, want a piece of them. And so I think that's really tough because they're also human beings. They also have hearts. They're also sensitive, and they also just want to be held. So being able to be in a safe space where there's no agenda and there's someone who can just say it to you how it is, and who you can explore and you can connect with and have a level of intimacy with without those kind of conflicting incentives and interests is really valuable. But what I would say would be pretty different, to entrepreneurs, especially in the starting stages, is the complexity and the rigidity of the systems that they have to deal with. And
Mm.
sometimes, so it's like, having to make, when I worked with the chief constables and the police forces in the UK, like they had to make insane decisions, like the serial
Yeah.
killer, and do we keep the house or do we burn it? But if we burn it, it's taxpayer money, and we could have diverted these policing team to maybe, protecting this park instead, right? So there's lots of subjective decision that need to be made, and it's not a perfect science, and they have it really hard because they have to respond. A lot of people, I think there's a misconception thinking that when you're leading 10,000 people in an organization that you have so much power, but really, especially in the public sector, I think in the private sector too, because you have shareholders, but there's external parties to the business that you have to answer to. So in
Mm.
public sector, you have to answer to the government, you have to answer to HMIC in respect to the police. Sometimes you have to answer to the Prime Minister in the UK. Private sector, if you're working for a financial institution or if you're working for a public company, then you have a board of directors that you need to
Yeah.
manage and keep accountable to. You have shareholders. And so often the consciousness of the systems that have been set up are really inflexible, really rigid, don't optimize for human potential and human well-being and impact and purpose in the world,
Yeah.
and are outdated compared to the decency, the values, the humanity of the leaders that run it. And so there's a mismatch because the leaders operate within those systems, and the systems are fucked, pardon my French. And so there's this insane mismatch they need to navigate through. And it's really, really, really tough. And I would say that at the highest of levels, ultimately it repels people. Like if you're in any way a good person, you end up being weeded out because it's so disheartening, and the systems make it so hard for those leaders to actually be good. And I think often we don't see that in the eye of the public and the media.
Yeah.
We just, oh, this person's terrible and this thing is broken. But we don't see how difficult it is to be in those people's shoes for those who have positive intentions and are trying to do the best that they can.
Yeah, I can definitely see that because if there's so many other people that are involved with it as well, and there's like that red tape around it, and they're trying to do good, but then the media, if they're in that level, is like turning it in a different way, then that's what you're seeing as well, right? So yeah, I can definitely see that. And I'd love to know what's like one of the biggest transformations that you've kind of seen with one of the clients you've worked with who's come to you.
Oh, oh my gosh, I love this question. I don't know if it's the biggest, but yeah, there's one that comes to mind where I have a client, he's still my client. We've been working together for many years. And when we first started working together, there were two things that were fundamentally true about his experience of life.
Okay.
One was he was a chronic people pleaser. Like
Mm,
he really and not to the point of, in a superficial way where, "Oh, I just want to be liked and I want the external validation. Let me do something nice for you, Lori, so you can be my friend." In a really deep existential way. So
okay.
he was identified to this role of, I am someone who serves others, and that is who I am. And that
Mm,
is the purpose of my existence, right? At an unconscious
okay.
level.
Yeah.
And so he was invisible. It was always giving, 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 and he didn't exist, which led to all sorts of issues, right? Servant leadership is great, good for some people's styles, but it really meant that, first of all, as the resourcer and as the CEO, he wasn't resourcing himself, right?
Yeah.
And so you really need, you can't pour from an empty cup. But also it created all sorts of dysfunctions because he didn't know how to honor his needs. He didn't know how to listen to
Mm,
his value, his worth, his opinions, because they just were invisible and just completely unaccounted for. And so when I see him now and how much space he takes, not from a place of entitlement or arrogance, but from a place of love, from a place of, I exist, I'm here, I'm important, and I'm able to make so many more refined and better decisions that benefits thousands of people because I'm connecting to my body and I'm honoring how I feel rather than how I think this group is going to be affected or this group is going to be affected or how they're going to be
mm.
linked or who's going to benefit the most. Actually using himself as a sieve in the process has just kind of made him 100x in impact, in likability, in fulfillment. And it's been beautiful to watch. Yeah.
Amazing. I love that story so much because I think that is so true. And, I think that happens a lot with entrepreneurs as well, is like identities can get wrapped up in like the business. Like you are, especially as like if you're a service provider, right? You're the face of the business. It's like you are the business. And it's like really taking away, like that's not your identity as a whole. Like there's so much more layers to us, right? Like multifaceted of like hobbies, what do you like to do in your spare time, relationships, what do you bring to those experiences, like not just like how do you show up in business necessarily. So I think a lot of people and leaders tend to focus so much on like that is their identity, that's like you said, on an existential level, and it's like really removing that part because all those other parts of ourselves really bring into that aspect as well. And it's really what we were speaking about before we started recording, and was mentioning it's like there's a lot of femininity coming up, especially around February. I had one of my clients, she was calling it like feminine February. I love that. So it was like, that's the vibe, but that's like a very feminine, energetic approach, right? Because if we're like heavy in that, like doing, and that pleasing and giving constantly, like we're just draining ourselves, leading to hustle and burnout, which will only get you so far, right? I think, of course, the masculine and like hustle times do have their place and space, but we need to like lean back and have those different seasons and creating more space. And I think especially in the corporate world is like that is what we are ingrained with, right? Is that hustle, like work hard, it's constant go, we need to get work done, and there's so much pressure to perform and hit results and all these things. But I think there's so much resistance I think for a lot of people around leaning back and getting into that femininity, which I know myself, I'm a generator in human design. I love a hustle sometimes, don't get me wrong. Like I have a lot of energy to go with it when I'm in that era. I love it. And I had a very hard time when I was trying to balance my feminine more and like lean back. And I'm like, how are you meant to be more productive by doing less? I don't get it. Like it didn't make any sense to me. But now that I have been able to like bring more balance, like it's been amazing. Like my nervous system is so much more calmer, you know, and I do a lot of that through like somatic work, breathing, all these different things as well. And I bring a lot of that into what I work with my clients also. So I think that is so important. And it's like really, I've seen such a shift with that coming in. I think a lot more people are realizing how important it is to bring that energy into our lives as well and into the workplace.
Yeah, I mean, the Western world and the corporate world loves to box and pigeonhole us. Fit into here. You know,
Yeah.
Deloitte, when I was at Deloitte, they were like, so who do you work with? Which industry? And it's like, no, no, no. I filter by receptiveness of the CEO. Are they open to doing the work or not? That's how I filter. It's a psychographic. It's what happens internally. Doesn't matter if they're running a bank. Okay, I won't work with oil and gas. And well, actually, some of them they're needed because we need to transition. So I don't want to, throw those under the bus completely, but some organizations are just not good organizations in the world.
Yeah.
Fine. Otherwise, why would I have to niche down in order to just fit within something that's just a tiny proportion and 2D representation of who I actually am? And we are so much more than those boxes. And I think a lot of people struggle with that when they don't know that it's okay,
Mhm.
that they have all these different facets. And you're absolutely right to say that so many people still get their external worth from really meaningless metric that have been handed to us by societal systems that are completely ineffective, like how much is in your bank account and what's your role and title and what car do you drive and what
Exactly.
house do you own. And it's just toxic because it's constantly keeping us on this dopamine rat race, wanting more, never feeling like we're enough, being like a fraud and feeling like an imposter when we have access to so much on the inside. And like you say, we get to play with this art of balancing because there's no such thing as
Hmm.
balance. Everything is always, balancing. And I truly believe that people don't know how. People
Yeah, I
don't know
agree.
how. And even, that client that I was sharing the story about, a lot of the way we supported him in achieving this transformation is through positive sponsorship, which is like the shrink term of, in a coaching session, helping them connect to a part of themselves that was just in the shadows for so long, so shy because it was so repressed, so put down their entire life, told that it was bad. And then for the first time ever, they're experiencing in a safe environment that part's actually perfect and okay. And they didn't know that was possible, but it's more than a theoretical concept. It's an experience that they have within themselves that they can then use to reclaim that part of themselves, become more whole, and then go back out into the world and make other people feel like that and know to do that with themselves because there's always deeper layer. And that kind of role modeling is so essential to effective leadership, particularly in 2024.
Yeah, I can agree more with that. Like, I think, it's like allowing that mask to come off a bit and integrating like that shadow aspects of ourselves because we're so afraid of having these parts seen, and then I think it's like, when you were talking about that, like I could almost feel like myself taking a breath of fresh air. Like, it's just like, you can feel that like, oh, it's like that release, of like all these false identities or faces that people put on in the workplace. And it's like, they feel like they can only let their hair down outside of work and be them true selves. But it's like, bringing more of that into the workplace and bringing that humanization factor back in as well, I think is so important. So
The
amazing.
humanization factor, I love it.
Yes, we need more of that. We need more of that. Camilla, I'd love to know a little bit about your own healing journey as well. Like you said, you got really into personal development, and I know that, yeah, you've been to some incredible retreats, like just from speaking to you outside of this podcast as well, and had some amazing experiences. But I'd love to know, yeah, kind of like what was the driving factor that really made you go down this route, and like what has been sort of like something like, I guess, like a big aha moment that you've had along that journey as well.
Oh my gosh, this is the stuff I could talk about all day long. This
I
is
love talking about this stuff too.
with my clients on the inside of the containers. I don't get to go public with a lot of this often.
Mm,
I think if I'm brutally honest with myself and with
yeah.
everybody listening, the thing that led me to dive into this is my own resistance, my own discomfort, and my own pain. Um,
Mm,
and it's like I started to see it's like things were creeping from my unconscious mind into my conscious awareness that I was not comfortable with this part of my relationship, right? With a loved one, where it's like, oh, I feel like they're controlling me, or I feel like I'm really triggered when they're doing this pretty
yeah.
harmless thing. Right. And it's like, that's interesting. Why am I so triggered? Why am I having such an emotional, visceral reaction whenever this human in my life does X behavior? And I didn't really understand that. And that fascinated me. And then also, whenever I would say like different triggers along the journey, when there are things that you don't understand, either things that you don't remember properly because your memory's failing you from something that you experienced long ago, or
Yeah.
some experience where there's a falling out or there's a conflict or there's something that goes really well, but you don't really understand why or what happened. They're kind of like really good signs for me that there's something deeper for me to heal and for me to work with. And oh my goodness, I don't even know where to go with this. But I'll share two huge ones, and here we go. This one I've never shared in public, so
Ooh,
this one you'll
juicy.
have only heard if you've been in direct proximity with me. My first shamanic retreat, it was in France,
Mhm.
with a French shaman, and we did this exercise. We were in a circle, and it was like really basic. It was like, tell me, um, 5 times in your life where your body said no and it was a yes anyways, right? And like at
Mm,
first, I didn't think anything of it. I was like, okay, whatever, just wrote some three pretty like basic events and then two pretty big ones. And as a result of that exercise, I like something surfaced and it felt to me at the time, it felt like the biggest skeleton I had in my closet. And, it was a traumatic incident I had experienced when I was 16. And this was like 10 years later. So when that happened. So I hadn't
right.
processed that. I hadn't healed it. I hadn't integrated it. I had completely dissociated myself from it and basically installed the program that I wasn't weak. I wasn't a victim. I wouldn't kind of identify myself as that. And I was so scared that this would have a negative impact on my career, on my life, on the quality of, my progression and trajectory that I just didn't deal with it at all. Totally
Mm,
repressed. And it
okay.
just surfaced in that exercise to the point where I I thought I was going to deal with it overnight because I was just so scared. I didn't know there was just so much energetic charge that was in the body that just needed to be let out. And that was like part
Yeah.
of the healing that needed to happen. But the other part was all the stories because the mind defends ourselves, like if we're in if we're in the jungle, like I'm going next week to the Amazon, right, in Peru. If we're in the jungle and you have like a snake eating an animal, right? Like the animal's just going to fight or flight. And after the threat of the snake disappears, they're going to just shake off the stress. They're not going
Yeah.
to internalize it, send it to the brain, and create a narrative that's made up about it. But that's exactly what human beings do. Instead of feeling, which is how the real healing happens, we just
Hmm.
send it upstairs and create some kind of rigidity and some false narrative. And then we believe that. And so for me, I had been lying to myself, right, about this event for 8 years before I was safe enough to be able to process it. And so 8 years, you don't know, is it me? Is it my personality like this? Is this my life? Is that what I like? Or is it because I responded to this event and all the kinks as a result that led me to
Yeah.
being I had no idea, and that was so ungrounding. I had to rebuild. It felt like it felt like my whole identity had crumbled to the ground.
Wow. Oh my gosh, I'm getting shivers as you're saying that. I can only imagine like how
Yeah.
that, yeah, that would have been. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. That is like so incredible. And I think, it's really these moments that we do as we dive deeper into our journey that like we unfold what's been hiding in us that like we didn't deal with from so many years ago. I can kind of relate to that. When I was doing money mindset work like a year or so ago, and I was doing tapping on something around money mindset, and all of a sudden it came up around there was an incident that involved a bit of sexual assault. I haven't actually opened up publicly about this either. And from when I was very young, like around 14 or 16, I can't remember. And I was like, what? And I just started like bawling. I had to do this releasing and forgiveness. And I was like, this and money mindset. Okay, how is this related? With tapping? Like, I'm like, I'm tapping on my wrist and I'm like, but it was so healing. Like, it sounds a bit silly when I'm saying it now, but like, I was able to release and let a lot of that go. And I realized I was holding up so much shame and unworthiness around that and guilt around that incident, thinking like, was this my fault? Was I responsible for that? And it was like so healing though to go through that and then also like impact my money mindset. And it was just like this incredible, like whole rounded release. And it's just like, this is the power of doing that deeper, like looking within and getting curious. And it's just so transformative. So yeah, I completely relate to what you were saying as well.
I appreciate you sharing that with me too. And you're absolutely right. Like it's not comfortable at all sometimes.
No, it's not.
Sometimes it's so much fun and there's nothing I'd rather do, but sometimes it's really uncomfortable. And there's nothing more empowering, right? Because exactly as you were saying, what's the link between this abusive incident that I was witnessing and a part of that I
Yeah.
had not asked to be a part of, and just limitations when it comes to wealth and abundance and money in my day-to-day life and in my professional life? And it turns
Yeah.
out there's a link, right? So when you're prepared to really build up the courage and confront yourself and actually see the
Yeah.
truth, then you get to deal with reality as it is rather than the distortion that you created in your mind. And that's to me real power, because with that comes choice, with that comes all of the awareness that you can then do something with or choose not to. But really, I can't believe it's not mandatory for people who are in leadership positions, because if you're not actively consciously doing this work, then you are traumatizing people who don't even know better. You don't even know that you're doing that. You think so highly of yourself. You think you're a really incredible team leader, and you're actually making that traumatic incident that much worse and constraining this person. We were in Mexico a couple of weeks ago on this retreat, and there was this guy, his name was Tim, and he gave this speech on basically having created this dream academy, and it was incredible. Like they were taking people out of poverty in LA, and they were like reuniting people, and
Wow.
they were making miracles happen, and it was so inspiring. And he was sharing how before he left his own corporate job, he went into that office and he asked for advice to the leader of that company. His name was Dale. And he was like, well, Dale, do you have any advice for me as I go off and set off to follow my dream in all this scary world? And Dale was like, you can't. You just can't. You can't do it. That's not life. And Dale was obviously like well-intentioned. That was just his perspective of life. And it's like, what do you like? The world isn't like sunshine and rainbows, son. Like get your ass back into the office and get a job like
Corporate.
everyone
Oh my
else. But
God.
as a result of that speech that he gave on stage, and we were laughing about it the whole week, we had a fuck Dale movement. It's just like, yes, the magic and fuck Dale.
Fuck Dale's perspective.
Yeah. And it's like, imagine Dale had hired you or me, right?
Yeah.
Imagine Dale had like dared to build up the courage to face all the time he'd been bullied and all the times he'd been shut down in his life. He wouldn't have turned out to be that way. He would have been a lot less bitter, a lot less resentful, a lot more inspiring. And he'd been able to be the reason why he pulled someone closer to achieving greatness and impacts than shutting them down. Like, imagine Timmy had listened to fucking Dale, he wouldn't
Yeah.
be where he is today. So yeah.
Timmy, we're rooting for you, and good on you for trusting your inner voice. Be in touch with your intuition. That is like wild. And it's so true. I was listening to a podcast once and like I forget what podcast it was, but they did the perfect like representation of like, some of like world leaders who have like, are like just these triggered 5-year-olds like running around with a lot of power and money basically that are controlling the world and like making these choices. And we all have to pay the benefit of it. And it's like, can you imagine a world where, this is why a lot of us are doing this work as well, because when you do get the money and the power into the hands of good-hearted people who are looking to make impact and change, that's where the change is really happening, right? And I think there's definitely, a continued rise with this happening, which is amazing. But and it's funny, when I was working for this corporation in Toronto before I moved to the UK 6 years ago. And when I was leaving, when I told them I was moving to the UK, again, a very like well-known leader in the space, like in the media quite a lot of the organization. All he said to me was, because it was right before Brexit was happening, all he said to me when I was leaving, he goes, "Why the hell would you move there?" That's literally what I got as well. That was it. Nothing about like, great on you for like taking that chance and moving abroad and, opening your horizons and getting cultured. Just why the hell would you do that? That was what I got. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And
I feel that
it's
it was a
it's
Dale.
and that shows like the power of our environments and surrounding ourselves by people who have slightly more expansive views and do believe in possibilities, because really there's
Yeah.
nothing we can do, and any constraints can be handled. And really what you said about the leaders doing this work, like I truly believe that if Putin like meditated every day, there wouldn't be a Russia-Ukraine war, and it's not rocket science, sitting with yourself,
No.
connecting to yourself, really finding the essence of what brings us together. We don't get taught that at school, and I don't understand why. And I'm so glad that it's beginning to change.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like the simplest, it's like I'm always blown away by like the simplest acts have the biggest impact and change, right? Like breath work, EFT tapping, right? Like all these things are so profound, meditation. But and like grounding work, they're so profound and they have such impact. And like it's so easy and free to do as well. Like anyone, can watch some YouTube videos, teach it in school. Like we definitely should all be learning this. I 100% agree. Amazing. Well, Camilla, I wanted to just ask you, I know you would mention you are going on an experience next week with ayahuasca. This is something I've been very curious about myself before. So I would love to hear what your past experience have been with ayahuasca and what's kind of the driving factor around this upcoming experience as well.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had a better answer about next week. I'm actually on the fence. I'm in Peru right now, and like
Yeah.
ayahuasca is from the Amazon, so it feels
Yeah.
completely crazy to not go and sit with medicine whilst I'm here. I also feel
Hmm.
called. But yeah, I mean, it's completely changed the trajectory of my life. I feel like I am still integrating my past experiences with it. And again,
Wow.
I do a lot of trance work in my practice in my business, and it's no different, right? So ayahuasca is, this, for anybody who doesn't know what it is, it's this plant found in the Amazon, and it has the compound DMT in it, which, by the
Hmm.
way, we just injected like supplements. If we could buy DMT supplements and injected them, we would just pee them out and nothing would happen. But because it's mixed with this other plant, when you ingest it, especially in, ceremonial, I only recommend doing ayahuasca in a ceremony with someone who knows
Yeah,
what they're doing, by the way, not just on your own somewhere.
definitely. No, definitely.
Trying it. Um, when you ingest it, the enzymes mean that the DMT stays in your body for 6 to 8 hours or however long, depending on each person. And so that's what creates the altered state of consciousness. But we need to remember that it's an altered state of consciousness, and that altered state of consciousness can be achieved with our brains without having to take anything else. It's a shortcut to get there, right? So it's not a substitute for the inner work. And I wouldn't go there first. That's what I'll say. Do the work, do the meditation, hire the
Yeah.
coach, then go on the journey, go to Peru, come to the medicine journeys. And I mean, I don't even know, we could spend again weeks and months talking about it. But I will share a couple of things. I will share that I had never done psychedelics in my life. I had never done LSD. I had never done ketamine. I had never, I still haven't done those things. And I went on a 12-day ayahuasca retreat 2 years ago.
Wow,
And it
12 days.
had
Okay.
5 ceremonies. So that's really, really intense. That's like the most intense you can get. It's like the most potent psychedelic in the world, or so I thought. Now I think it's iboga, but that's another conversation. And yeah, I think in that week, I mean, I went through the biggest ego death of my life, and it was really scary. And
Yeah.
it was probably also the first time I truly so deeply surrendered. And for a control freak in recovery, that was such powerful medicine and so healing for me. And to see that what's on the other side of surrender is not this big, scary black monster, it's actually
Mm,
bliss. It's actually freedom. It's actually peace from my mind and total fluidity of being. So that was incredible. And maybe something that might be relatable with the audience is before I had gone on that retreat, I was
yeah.
convinced, I had a super strong cognitive analytical mind. I love to understand things. I think very fast. I'm an overthinker, all those things. And I had obviously been on this journey, so I was developing my intuition and cultivating my connection to the invisible world and working with energetics in all these different ways. And I knew that that intuition was more powerful than my isolated mind. And so I thought I had to kill my mind and quiet my mind in order to follow that path. And it was so
Right.
brutal, that way
Yeah.
of like relating to myself on the inside. Like it was like I was at war, like such cognitive
Yeah.
dissonance. And when I came back from that ayahuasca journey, I really, really realized that my superpower was I have both, right? I get to do this with CEOs, global CEOs, running organizations in the corporate world, because there's no way they would hire someone who couldn't explain it to them. And it's like, let's talk
Hmm.
about your nervous system and limbic resonance, and we'll take it at your level. And at the same time, there's like another level going on where I'm talking to their
Yeah.
mammal to mammal, and all sorts of wizardries happening, right? And it's like this bridge that it kind of like helped me own my positioning of I get to bridge reason and intuition. It's not like one or the other. It's really, really both, and growing our container to hold both. And I feel like that served me really well.
That is incredible. I love that it really helped you to like bridge those two together because I think that's such a, like I said, it's such an incredible work that you're doing and much needed as well. And I think sometimes people think you're one or the other, so it's incredible that that really helped you see that. And I definitely relate because we do have a lot of high achievers, ambitious women in the audience who are that like go, go, go overthinkers. I relate to that as well. I'm definitely an overthinker. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I'm definitely like interested to try ayahuasca at some point in time in my life. I don't think I'm quite there yet, but I'm definitely interested in. I think in the meantime, I'm sticking to like my breath work and my tapping, but yeah.
You'll know when it's
Yeah,
time. Like,
I
have no
heard, I
doubt.
heard, I heard she calls you. Mother Ayahuasca is calling. I heard you got the call. So yeah.
I was in Lisbon because it was COVID and I couldn't get to Peru, and so it was in Portugal, that first retreat. And my uncle called me, and everybody was trying to dissuade me from going, by the way. And it was almost like my loved ones were having this funeral for me when I was still
Oh
very
my
much here.
gosh.
What are you guys doing? This is really terrifying. But they all thought I was gonna die, or a part of me was gonna die. And my uncle called
Just your
me
ego, just your ego.
because we were in the middle of nowhere in the mountains, and I was in Lisbon just like waiting to kind of like for my ride to go join the group.
Yeah.
And it was like his last attempt at dissuading me from going. And he was like telling me about his ex-girlfriend who did it and started talking to plants and went crazy. And he was like, please go to the Algarves, go to Madeira, go surfing for a week, please.
Do
And
some
I could
yoga.
just do some yoga. And I could just feel, in my heart that like this was happening, like it
Mm,
didn't matter what anybody said. Like there wasn't a person on this planet that could take me away from going. I felt so deeply called, like it was
yeah.
just to happen. And I knew that the only thing, of course, like my mind was still part of the game. And it's like, if I don't trust the safety of the container and the facilitators, then I will leave. And as I arrived within like the first hour, I met two people, one Canadian woman who worked for Deloitte Canada, like I'm not making this up. And she was
Wow.
scared of, she had never done anything like it. And she said, I have been researching this for 3 years and this is the best.
Wow.
And I was like, that's great. Because I just picked it randomly because the people that I was referred to, like, I didn't get a good feeling. And then the second
Okay.
person I met was this quite alternative guy who had done it hundreds of times. And he was like, I keep coming back to this. And I was like, I'm in good hands. This is very
Amazing.
reassuring and very
Yeah, I think
lucky.
you just have to trust that nudge when it comes up. And that's so beautiful that you still followed the calling and like look how, it's like obviously very like helped you a lot along your own healing journey and to get you to where you are today. So that's incredible.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, Camilla, I've loved this conversation so much. It could go on forever. But I'd love to know, is there anything like you'd love to share with the audience at the moment? Anything exciting that you're working on in your business or programs that you have coming up?
Oh my gosh, yes, we've just released our first online course, which is so exciting because it's the most
Amazing.
accessible offering that we've ever had. So if you're interested in, mastering your state or, just dipping your toe in the world of energy, come on over. We've got a really exciting offer on. And then yeah, we've got things at every level. So connect with me on Instagram or LinkedIn and yeah, I'll be happy to help you depending on your personal circumstances.
Amazing. And I'll put all of Camilla's links in the show notes as well, so you can learn more about her programs and connect with her on Instagram and LinkedIn as well. Amazing. And is there anything else, maybe a piece of advice or wisdom you'd love to leave with the audience before we sign off?
Yeah, like we're just like we're so lucky to be alive and we're not gonna get
Mm.
to do this twice, like just do the scary thing. Go all in on yourself. You deserve it.
I love that. Oh, what a great piece of advice. Simple, but fucking powerful. Such a great way to end the episode. Amazing. Well, Camilla, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure. I've loved this conversation. Like I said, I could talk about most of the stuff like for hours and hours. So, thank you so much for coming on again. And yeah, we'll chat soon.
Thanks, Lori. This was fun.
So fun.